This presentation is intended for my Chinese audience. However, my Western followers and Christians alike will be extremely blessed to hear what the following message has to reveal. And this revelation will be startling and promised to be some of the most profound you've heard in a long time. This past summer, I was directed by the Lord to take a position to work in China. I was not sure how this would fit in with my current understanding about what I thought God was doing in my life. China is a great country. I lived here for 12 and a half years, and I love the people and culture. But I didn't know what I could possibly do with my ministry or how I could continue to work on my YouTube channel. Despite loving this country, I must face the fact that the Great Firewall makes it extremely hard to access the blocked sites that I am so used to using. But the Lord had me come here anyway. It was then, while I was in prayer, when I learned about what I had to do. I was to share a message not directed to a Western audience, but to China. It hit me. The information that I compiled 2 years earlier was exactly there for a message as this. And now I'm here. It is time to put this all together and present it not only for China, but for the world to learn the truth. As we all know, the Chinese civilization goes back thousands of years. It is one of the only ongoing civilizations uninterrupted from its beginnings to the very present. The earliest period they've uncovered goes back to the Xia dynastic period, where these people lived along the Yellow River. This is known as the cradle of Chinese civilization. Nothing is conventionally known of anything before this period. However, conventional anthropological study states that all civilizations derive from Mesopotamia, the region along the Tigris and Euphrates in present-day Iraq. It is no coincidence that the Bible tells us that all the world's civilizations derive from here in the Tower of Babel narrative. I cover the entire epoch in 3 episodes in my Evidence Uncovered series. Keeping this in mind, I want to introduce the evidence that the world's civilizations do draw their origins from one common race in Mesopotamia. The evidence is found encoded in one of these early civilizations' writing system, and that writing system is the written Chinese language. I explain and reveal this amazing evidence in the 3rd episode of that Tower of Babel series. I posted the link in the video description below. I strongly encourage you to watch it after this one. But I am about to reveal much more to this mystery that will absolutely shock you to the core, because the fact of the matter is, the God of the Judean Christian faith is not so foreign to the Chinese as many might think. You see, a lot of you may think that introducing the Yahweh God to China is a foreign God to them. He is certainly not. When the people that would become the Chinese or Far Eastern civilization left Mesopotamia, they may have forgotten the native language from whence they came, but they did not forget who their God was, because the earliest Chinese wrote his name as simply Shangdi. And as I explain in the Chinese script episode, they kept records of their pre-China history, and that Shangdi possesses the very same attributes as Yahweh, God of the Bible. According to the Chinese code, he is the creator of all things, the supreme all-powerful God who created 2 people in a garden, banished them out of the garden, and called upon Fuxi to build a large ship to survive a flood. And the number of people saved? 8. They later disembark the ship and repopulate the earth. No, this wasn't taken from the book of Genesis. Much of this information is taken from what is encoded in the Chinese script. However, the full story is taken from the Fuxi and Nuwa classic accounts. Now, here's where things get very interesting. God never forgot about his people who are now scattered in all directions from Sumer. And they didn't forget about him either. But like we see today, people have a choice to keep him as center of their lives or not. As we can see, many of these civilizations chose to reject or forget him and turn to pagan practices, as I explained in the Tower of Babel series. Regarding China, it appears that they kept venerating him for many, many centuries, well past the time of Christ, which brings me to reveal the big mystery that most are not aware of, including most Chinese people today. Because the Chinese venerated and worshipped Shangdi by this point, you would expect that if something incredibly important were to happen in Israel, that God's people around the remote parts of the world should know about it. By important, I mean of earth-changing importance. According to the Bible, what was the one event that changed absolutely everything? It was the coming of the Messiah to the earth that would bring about a covenantal change that makes salvation far more achievable for all mankind. We know that China had a connection with the Jewish community at least as far back as 700 BC. Thus, it is believed that the Chinese could very well have known about the impending coming of the Messiah from that time. Could this truly be? Absolutely, because we are about to learn that the Bible actually mentions China by its ancient name. And this news was extremely relevant to all Gentiles around the world, apart from the Jewish people themselves, because Jesus Christ came for the salvation of both Jews and Gentiles after all. As we learned in our Mysteries Uncovered Magi episode, we know that the Persians were also aware of the coming Messiah as well. You see, the prophet Isaiah spoke about his redeemed people coming from many parts of the world. Isaiah 43, 5-6, and Psalms 107, 3. Both mention 4 compass directions in the context of Yahweh's ingathering of his people. So, we now take a look at where Isaiah mentions China as one of these origins by name. Isaiah 49:12. Look, these are coming from afar, and look, these from the north and from the west, and these from the land of Sinim. Sinim here can trace its meaning to the people of the land of Sin. The name of Sinim traces through history to China's earliest connections to the west. The Romans referred to South China as Sino, coming from the late Latin Sine, and the Jewish people would have naturally had the same root name for them. And as biblical scholars note, that, based on the literary context, the wording the land of, plural gentilic, and the phonetics of Sinim, that the term means China. Therefore, we can see that as early as Isaiah, the Chinese were not only known to the Hebrews, but the Chinese were also well aware of the promise of a coming Messiah, as made aware by the redeemed mention in the verse. And God was at work. He would have ensured that the biggest news concerning his arrival would be known, one way or another. And now, we arrive at the most profound information I'm about to share in this video. The ancient Chinese kept impeccable records going back to its early formation, and one record found in one of the astronomical records of the Book of the Han Dynasty was a document dated to what we can translate to the 5th of March in 5 BC. It reads, "In the 2nd month of the 2nd year of Jiangping, the comet was out of Altair for more than 70 days. It is said, comets appear to signify the old being replaced by the new. Altair, the sun, the moon, and the 5 stars are in movement to signify the beginning of a new epoch, the beginning of a new year, a new month, and the new day. They go on to say, the appearance of this comet undoubtedly symbolizes change. The extended appearance of this comet indicates that this is of great importance. 70 days from this early period of March brings us to late April to early May of 5 BC, which is around the very time of the birth of Jesus Christ. Then we get the big one. We arrive at the History of the Latter Han Dynasty, Volume 1, Chronicles of Emperor Guangwu, in the 7th year of his reign. This is dated at 31 AD. He wrote, Summer, 4th month of the year of the day of Renwu, the imperial edict reads, Yin and Yang have mistakenly switched, and the sun and the moon were eclipsed, or complete darkness. Now the most riveting part, it continues. The sins of all the people are now on one man. Pardon is proclaimed to all under heaven. How did the Chinese know of this about the crucifixion by 31 AD? No missionary could have reached China yet at this stage, because Jesus had just been crucified. Yet in one other passage from the same period in the Han is from Annals number 18, Guihai, that states, Eclipse on the day of Guihai, man from heaven died. By divine inspiration, the Spirit of God chose to record this event for all of China to know about it. And that's not all. 3 days after the recording of the death of this God-man, another record was made 3 days later. During the reign of Emperor Guangwu on the day of Bingyin on the 4th month, a halo encircled the sun, again found in Annals number 18. And that occurred during the resurrection of Christ. It is no wonder that China continued to venerate and worship Shangdi for centuries. Put it together, they knew the date of his birth, the date of his death, and the date of his resurrection. And yet, there is more. The Chinese have recognized the spiritual symbolization of sheep in their society during the Xia dynasty, and quite some time going forward. It is documented that the sheep and the bull, who represent loyalty, were the sacrificial animals to be offered to Shangdi. Emperor Tang, around 1787 BC, disguised himself as a white, unblemished sacrificial animal to take upon himself the sins of his people, such that Shangdi would forgive them and send them rain to stop the 7 years of drought. The rain did come in response to the emperor's humble actions on behalf of the people. Thus, the ancient Chinese understood that the sacrifice of the unblemished sheep and bull would take away their sins. Now, when we look at the year 1787 BC, it falls at around the time when Jacob and his sons arrive in Egypt and meet with Joseph, who is now the vizier over Egypt. So we see that Shangdi desires animal sacrifices, especially the bull and the lamb. We see this veneration to Shangdi as late as the Ming Dynasty. The very builders of the Imperial Palace, or the Forbidden City in Beijing, here where I'm writing today, built a temple complex in 1406 and dedicated it to Shangdi. We know it today as the Temple of Heaven, a masterpiece of architecture and landscape design. There is one written record from 1585 of an emperor using the Temple of Heaven to pray for rain. After months of drought, Emperor Wanli fasted for 3 days before leading his officials from the imperial palace to the temple and holding a special ceremony for the weather to change. Upon arriving at the temple, the emperor knelt on the lowest step of the circular mound altar, burned the sacrificed animals, prayed, offered incense, and prostrated to the God of the highest heaven. These are the precise ceremonial practices that we see from the early Holy Tabernacle and First Temple period in Judea. One Confucian classic from the 2nd century BC called The Rites of Zhou records these same acts of worship, and archaeologists have discovered the bronze ritual vessels with Chinese characters depicting sacrifices of animals such as ox and sheep, confirming that these practices took place from China's cradle of civilization all the way up to the Han Dynasty. To sum up, I want to play one clip from the video I produced 3 years ago on that Tower of Babel series, Part 3 on the Chinese script. The full video link is in the description below. I implore you to watch it in its entirety, which would reinforce this message. So I leave you with this clip. Man's guilt of sin separated him from fellowship with God. But God provided a way for man's relationship with Him to be restored through sacrifice. Just as in the story from the Bible, the ancient Chinese people knew that the sacrifice of a lamb brought righteousness and God's favor, according to Genesis 4:4. If we take the word shou, meaning hand, plus ge, meaning dagger or axe, we get the word wo, meaning me or I. From here, if we take wo and add it to yang, meaning sheep or lamb, we get the word yi, meaning, now get ready for this, righteousness. Now put this all together and you roughly get, in my hand I take my dagger against the lamb and achieve righteousness. To conclude, if you want to reconnect to your Shangdi, he is waiting for you. You wouldn't be alone. Today, there is a vibrant underground community of Christianity in China. There are officially 44 million practicing Christians, but likely tens of millions more, who choose not to publicly identify themselves for fear of suppression or worse. But do not fear. Christ died for you. Because the sacrificial sheep from ancient China was a foreshadowing, a forerunner for Christ to be the last sacrifice for your sins. I added the link to my gospel message video in the description below. This will explain why you need salvation, how you can receive salvation from Him, and what you need to do to receive it. Do that, and I will see you in paradise.